Good day and welcome to Letters and Politics. I'm Mitch Jeserich. The cover story for the latest edition of Harper's magazine is an essay by our guest today, Barry Lynn. Barry Lynn's executive director of the Open Markets Institute, and his piece in Harper's magazine takes on liberal lawmakers for allowing tech companies to become the new economic barons of the 21st century, not so different from the railroad barons of the 19th century. Now, those are my words. He also praises those in power who are actually trying to rein in these companies, including President Joe Biden. The piece is called The Antitrust Revolution, Liberal Democracy's Last Stand Against Big Tech. Again, Barry Lynn is executive director of the Open Market Institute, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. Barry Lynn, thank you so much for taking time this morning to join us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, I took some liberties in my introduction in interpreting your article by calling today's tech companies and their owners the barons of the 21st century, comparing them to the railroad barons of the late 19th century. And you know, would you agree or disagree with that assessment? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
It's a pretty good assessment. And one way to understand corporations like Google and Facebook and X is to view them as the communications platforms, the communications networks of our time, you know, and they dominate, they control how people speak to one another across these platforms. They control the sort of the traffic of information, much in the way that the railroads control the traffic of people and goods on their networks in the late 19th century. You know, so it's actually a very accurate description, and it cuts at one of the key lessons for Americans today, which is that a lot of the solutions to today's tech monopolists lie in our history of dealing with the networks of the 19th century, which included the railroads, included the telegraph, the early telephone system. And, so we regulated all of these networks in pretty much the same way. And so it's a very accurate description.
And the railroads changed people's lives and changed the economy considerably. It was like the internet of its day. It made things much more accessible than they were before.
Absolutely. It's a trip that used to would take 2 weeks. You could suddenly do it in 6 hours. A trip that would from one part of the country to another. You could move products, so you transformed how we manufacture things. But at the same time, the railroad revolution was accompanied by the telegraph revolution. Like the telegraph lines were built alongside the railroads, partly because they helped the railroads function, but then they also were used to carry information from one place to another instantaneously. So railroad would take, it could take a day and a half to go from Chicago to New York. But of course, with the telegraph, you could send information instantaneously. So you had these two revolutions in how fast people could move, but also in how instantly people could communicate. And so in many ways, we think of today as a time of unprecedented change, of sort of revolutionary change in technology. Actually, in America and actually around the world, we have had many previous periods in which we've had revolutionary social and economic change driven by new technologies.
And then this, it's interesting. I've thought a lot about the railroads, but not about the telegraph. And that's important too. Barry Lynn, the title of your article is The Antitrust Revolution. Let me just go to basics here so that everyone's on the same page. What does antitrust mean?
Yeah, so antitrust really means these are the set of laws. And we can, without going into the technical origins of the word, but it's a set of laws that in the United States we have established to ensure that the people who control the corporations on which we depend treat us all fairly, that they don't use their control over essential services to sort of manipulate us, to extract wealth from us, to control what we think and how we speak. And, it's basically another way of looking at the antitrust laws is what we use to protect our democratic institutions and protect our most fundamental personal liberties. Liberty to speak with whom we want to share the news that we want to share. It's antitrust is constitutional in nature. It's like how we carry the basic structures of checks and balances out from the political system into the economic system. Because if you allow for extreme concentration of power, extreme concentration of control in the political economy, the people who control those levers, who control those platforms, those people can overturn our democratic system.
And you write in this article a lot about history as well. When I think of antitrust, I think of sort of the Theodore Roosevelt presidency and his efforts to try to rein in the railroads. Is that the first time that we really take on antitrust in this country, or is this something that's inherent?
So antitrust, we start using the word antitrust in the 1880s, 1890s. This is the period when we were dealing with the railroads and dealing with the telegraph system. And it actually, the word antitrust comes from how we dealt with a particular type of corporate organization, which was they were called trusts, so it was an early form of corporation in which multiple corporations would be brought under a single umbrella, and it was called a trust. So this was the way of breaking the control of the umbrella antitrust. And but really, I mean, antitrust, the basic goals of antitrust, we can take them back to the Constitution. The Constitution was, in some ways, the greatest anti-monopoly document ever established in human history, because it's all about making sure, breaking the ability of individuals to concentrate power and control. And that's true for the inside government and also outside government. And then really, the Declaration of Independence it's a liberty document. And so antitrust is one of the tools that we use to achieve the goals of the Declaration of Independence. And what I actually focus on in this article is I take it back to really what I would say is the foundations of modern democracy in the early 17th century in England, in Europe, when you had these authoritarian monarchs, King James in England, later you had Louis XIV in France, who were seeking to concentrate all power in their own selves. And so modern liberalism dates to that period. And modern liberalism was really what is the set of laws and rules that we established to prevent the concentration of power in a single individual or in a small clique, a small group of individuals. So we've been doing this for a long time, and we have a very extensive and sophisticated set of tools, legal tools and institutional tools that we have established to help ourselves keep ourselves free, help ourselves protect our democracy. And we can talk in more detail about this, but what happened is we did this for in America for more than 200 years. We can say in sort of the Anglo-American tradition, we've been doing it for 400 years. But then about 40 years ago, in the early days of Reagan, for a variety of reasons, we changed how we use all these laws, these competition policy, antitrust laws. We radically changed how we use the laws. And so today, 40 years after those changes that took place in the early 80s, we wake up and our world looks radically different. America looks radically different than it did before that period. How we treat large corporations, how we treat small business, how we treat our communications infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure. We went through a radical change, a revolutionary change in the 1980s, which was then accelerated by Bill Clinton in the 1990s in many respects. So this is not a partisan issue. But this revolution that took place, this revolution that was started by Reagan and really kind of completed by Bill Clinton, that is the foundation of many, if not most, of the crises that we face today.
So it's not even a change in the laws; it's just how we apply them.
How we apply them. That's what was amazing. That was what was brilliant about what the officials in the Reagan administration did. They said, it's going to be so difficult to change these laws. It's like to undo a law, especially a law of liberty. People are going to say, "Oh, no, we're fine with that law. Just leave it as is." So what they did is they said, if we could actually get people to see the laws differently, then the laws will function differently. So they created a new intellectual framework through which to see the law. Until the 1980s, the purpose of all of our anti-monopoly laws, of our laws of liberty, was to protect us as citizens, as protect us as people who care about our ability to speak to each other, who care about our democratic institutions, who care about our ability to bring better ideas to market. So it's all about us as people who make and think and do. And then what they did in the 1980s is they said, "Oh, we should change all the laws so they focus on the individual only as a consumer." And then they said, if we're only focusing on the consumer, what does the consumer want? The consumer wants stuff, right? They want cheap stuff. And how do you get cheap stuff? Well, you get cheap stuff by, and this is actually debatable, but they said you get cheap stuff by concentrating enormous capacity through scale and scope. And so what they did is they changed the framework. The purpose of the law is to serve the consumer, not the citizen. And then they said, well, since we're aiming to serve the consumer, what we're going to do is we're going to allow monopoly concentration, because that's the best way to put more stuff into the hands of the consumer.
So, and we're talking about neoliberalism here, right?
Yeah, we're talking about it's like we in the United States, for probably most of the last 40 years, we might have called it libertarianism. Really, sort of, I would say, since Bernie came along, 2016, in Europe they always call it neoliberalism. So United States libertarianism, Europe neoliberalism. Since the Bernie in 2016, in the United States we've kind of shifted over more to talk about neoliberalism. And but yeah, it just, what it means is, and it sounds good, neoliberalism, new liberalism, but what it actually meant was anti-liberalism. Liberalism is how you protect liberty, and what neoliberalism is how do you destroy liberty. And so for 40 years, we've been in a system in the United States, and to a lesser extent in Europe and other countries, that promotes the destruction of individual liberty. And that's why so much has gone wrong in America and around the world. And, we wake up and we look around and go, this is not the America that I read about in civics books. This kind of concentration of power and control is not what's supposed to exist. We had the Standard Oil case. What happened? And so what happened was that these basic laws that were designed to protect our liberty, that we designed to protect our liberty, we forgot how to use them. And that's what's amazing right now, is that we are relearning at an incredibly rapid rate how to use these laws. So that's the revolution I'm talking about. Is since Biden took power in 2021, the people who are in the administration have sort of engineered the most important reestablishment of these laws of liberty. Really, probably, if we are honest about it, since the Constitution.
That's an interesting shift, having seen us as citizens to consumers. And this is something that's sort of Robert Bork is at the center of, right? The very controversial Supreme Court nominee who who never made it
Yes,
through.
yes. Robert Bork was brilliant in many ways. I mean, it's like the folks who did this. There was also another sort of legal scholar named Richard Posner, who I actually had the privilege of getting to meet at one point in his offices, and when he was a judge in Chicago. They they came up with this radical new idea, and they justified it, with a whole sort of this new interpretation of the integration of economics and the law. And what they said is that law should promote efficiency and not freedom, not liberty. It's and then obviously scholars on their own can't achieve this kind of revolution, but the ideas that they were promoting back in the late 70s and early 80s, powerful people understood that these changes in how we enforce the law would be very good for powerful people. It would let them get richer. It would let them have more control. It would give them more ability to boss people around. So powerful people back in the late 70s and 80s, they took these ideas from these scholars and they imposed them on our society.
Tell me about what the Supreme Court has recently done on these issues with big tech companies. And I guess one particular case that's very important was called Moody versus Net Choice.
Yes. So this is we had in the United States, sometimes there are certain days when everything seems to happen all at once. And one of those days was July 1 of this year. And we had two cases that day that were decided by the Supreme Court. One of them was the case about President Trump getting immunity, from prosecution for actions in office and after office. And this was the case in which the conservatives of the court said, well, actually the president should pretty much have absolute immunity. And in some ways, what they did is their decision brought us back 400 years to the fight against James. So for 400 years ago, the foundations of modern democracy was Parliament putting rules around the king. And what the Supreme Court just did, and they were referring to James in this case.
They mentioned James. Of course, they said, James, that's where we get the King James Bible.
Yeah. So they said, well, actually, in the case of a president, in this case, Trump, we need to take these restrictions off because we need to let the president do whatever he wants to do. And so that was decision number one. And we even had Justice Sotomayor say, in that case, we have just put the president above the law, like the way we used to put the king above the law. So she was right on in that dissent. The other case, the one that you mentioned, Net Choice, was a case in which basically Google and other tech platforms were asking to be established in a position above the law. That they actually that they would have the ability to regulate and to edit what we do on their platforms in a way that essentially establishes them as the law over us. And it was a radical, crazy idea that they would ask for this kind of control, this complete license to do anything to us, which they kind of already have. But it's not fully formalized. So they were asking for a formalization of a license that they have been assuming in certain respects for a number of years now. And so so here in that case, we had an opposite sort of decision in which, politically, and it was the conservatives on the court who opposed giving the platforms that kind of license. And it was actually the liberals led by Justice Kagan who said, well, let's let Google be king because we trust Google to do the right thing. It was so what we had on July 1 of 2024 is we had two politically insane decisions. One that favored the concentration of power in the presidency, and the other one that favors the concentration of power in the tech platforms. And one of them was promoted by the conservatives on the court, and the other was promoted by the people who say they consider themselves liberals. So it was an amazing day in our democracy, and it's not the end of things, but it was certainly not. It wasn't a good day for our democracy.
I mean, for both of these decisions to be made on the same day, you couldn't have asked Barry for a better story to be able to write. Would you have for Harper's Magazine? Barry C. Lynn is our guest. Barry Lynn is executive director of the Open Market Institute. He is the author of the book Liberty from All Masters, and he has the cover piece. He's the author of the cover piece in the latest edition of Harper's Magazine called The Antitrust Revolution, Liberal Democracy's Last Stand Against Big Tech. Can you lay out more for me all that Google is involved in, the way you lay it out in your article, because it's pretty breathtaking.
Yes, so there's a couple of antitrust cases against Google right now, one of which the Department of Justice just won. So a lot of people may have read about this victory in court in which Judge Mehta, in his decision, said Google is an illegal monopoly. That case focused on Google's control over search. The second case, which was just recently argued in Alexandria in Virginia in a courtroom there, focused on Google's control over advertising technology, online advertising technology. So in both cases, these were in both instances, these were enormously important cases. I think that the DOJ is going to win the second case as well, the one against on ad tech. But then what you see is, okay, here you're looking at search. That's probably how most people think about Google. You think about Google for search. But then you also, but Google also controls, what we saw with ad tech is they control all of the technology on which advertising is placed all around the web. So wherever you are, not just on Google, but wherever you are, when you're seeing advertising, it's probably being placed through a system that is controlled by Google.
So Google even if also it's not controls, a Google page,
yeah, every place they control everything. Google also, they control YouTube. So the dominant video search system is controlled by Google. They're the dominant provider of mapping services through Google Maps and Waze. They control Waze. They control the operating system for most computers in this country in the form of Chrome. They control the operating system for sort of most phones around the world in the form of Android. And we can go on and on and on. It's like what they've done.
You might have noticed my email to you with the Zoom link for our chat today was from a Gmail account.
Yeah, so they actually are a dominant provider of email services and of document services. They actually have they control cables under the sea. They control how the internet operates to a large extent. They dominate the governance of the World Wide Web.
I don't know how to use the internet without Google.
Well, the thing is, you could have this kind of concentration. It's just really, the issue is like, how do you govern the power, right? And so what we've done is we've done a bad job of governing the power. And we've let them use the power to make themselves more and more and more powerful and to manipulate us as individuals in more and more and more sort of radical and aggressive ways. And so that's, power, that's one of the things that we've learned in America over the years and around the world is you can have monopolies like the railroads. You mentioned the railroads. We can have these immensely powerful network monopolies and make them work for us. And we have a simple set of rules, and it's really just we require that. We've done this time and again for 400 years, and we just say, if you control an essential service, if you control an essential network monopoly, thou shalt treat everybody the same. You will give everybody the same pricing. You will give everyone the same services. You will not block anyone from the marketplace, and you will not amplify anyone's access to the marketplace. Everything has to be, all business has to be governed according to the same rules. So whether you're rich or poor, whether you are powerful or just a regular citizen, you get the same treatment. You have to, everyone waits in the same line. And that's the foundation of democracy. And this is not new. This is not radical. This is conservative. This is how we achieve democracy. And so in the case of Google, we did two things. We allowed them to combine a number of platforms, more platforms than anyone else has ever combined before. And we've allowed them to use those platforms to manipulate us, because we didn't apply these simple non-discrimination, these simple fair treatment rules. So that's the problem that we face with Google, but it's also, in different ways with Amazon, in different ways with Apple, in different ways with Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean, these other companies we have very similar dynamics. We're focusing on Google because it's just so, I want to hone in on a point that you're making here, just to make it crystal clear. Your experience on the internet is very different than my experience on the internet, because all of our experiences are personalized according to these algorithms they use of giving us what they think we want to see.
That's a hugely important issue, and it's not just the algorithm, actually. So this is why we hear about all the surveillance, all the spying. We hear about all the data that they gather on us. So traditionally, like we were talking about, it's like if you're a railroad, if you're the telegraph company, you have to treat everybody the same. Everyone has to get in line. You have to post the prices, and then you have to charge everyone the same price for the same service. And what Google and these large tech platforms have done is they have built systems of control that are based on manipulation, based on this license to discriminate, to treat people differently. So their entire business model is based on this. That's why they collect all this information on us. Like, they have, Google has on every single person that uses Google, they have thousands of pages of information about you that they've stored away.
Thousands
and thousands of pages. The people have gone in and they've downloaded. Google actually allows you to download the information they have on you, and people have gone in and they've looked at what the amazing amount of information they have. Every single thing you do on their platform, every movement you take, they store that away. That's why they're spending so much money on building out these cloud systems, is to store this information about you. But they're not doing it because they want to help you. They're saving this information because it's of value to them, because it helps them manipulate you to do things like buy something that you might not have bought, or to vote in a way you might not have voted. And then they get to collect money from the person that wanted you to buy something, or they'll collect money from the person who wanted to get you to vote in a certain way. And that's how they make their money. They built the world's most awesome manipulation machine. They use all of this data that they've collected on you to run this manipulation machine. And then they collect money from the people who want to manipulate you when they rent to those people their manipulation machine.
I think a lot of people are scared that, these thousands of pages they have on each and every one of us about every action we've done on one of their platforms, which is basically almost any platform you're using. I'm sure there's exceptions, but good chance it's some Google's connected to it, that information would be made public. Is that possible?
Well, if under it could be made public. Well, it's being made public. It's being made public it's being sold off every day, every moment to other advertisers, to people who want to manipulate you, to people who are data brokers who are creating different kinds of profiles about you. So all the information about you is constantly being shared around among a certain set of companies, right? So in that sense, it is being made public. We have repeatedly seen how outsiders can actually buy information and start to create a public profile of you or of your neighbor, of your grandmother, and
they're able to know who you are specifically. Like it's just not some.
Yeah, and this is true. Like this is true for like the government. People inside the government can buy all kinds of data off of the marketplace that allow them to zero down on who you are. They have tricks for like zeroing down on who you are. But the Chinese do this also. We actually published a friend of mine, Johnny Ryan, published a couple reports last year about how the Chinese government can buys all of this same data on the marketplace and uses it to make profiles of your congressperson, of the U.S. general, so that they can manipulate these people in different ways. They're not trying to sell. The Chinese are not trying to sell advertising to people. The Chinese are trying, they have a different goal in mind. But yeah, so the whole system is it's wide open, it is uncontrolled, but the reason that this information is of value, the reason that Google pays to store it, to gather it and store it, the reason that Microsoft pays to gather it and store it is because they can use this information to manipulate you and make money through that manipulation by renting out their manipulation machines to powerful actors who want to sell you something or to change what you read, how you vote. That's the core of this. So it's now, we should talk a little bit about about what the government, what the Biden administration has been doing and what the Harris administration is likely to continue to do, which is that they're, for the first time in these last 40 years, they've set out to break this pro-monopoly, anti-democracy system of control, system of law, and rebuild the original system of law, the original system of liberty that was established in the United States in 1776 and 1789 and 1865, and then and also, to some extent, we can trace back to the fights against the authoritarian kings of the 17th century, because that's what. There is good news in the middle of this. It is a terrifying, absolutely terrifying concentration of power and control. But the people in the Biden administration, and I am absolutely sure that a President Harris would continue this, they have torn into this system and they are restructuring it to rebuild the systems of liberty and democracy that we need if we are going to survive as a democratic society in the 21st century.
What's going on with Lina Khan, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission?
So Lina Khan is someone I know well. I hired Lina out of college in 2011, and Lina worked with our group, Open Markets, for 3 years, and then she went to Yale Law. And then when she graduated from Yale, she worked with us for another year between 2017 and 2018. Lina Khan is now the chair of the Federal Trade Federal Trade Commission, and she has been one of the two leading law enforcers in America fighting these monopolies. And so she has brought fundamentally important cases against Amazon, especially. She's also pursuing a case against Facebook. As I mentioned before, Jonathan Cantor in the Department of Justice and his team have brought these two cases against Google, and they have also brought a case against Apple. And so this is the most exciting time in antitrust. In our civics books, we read about the Standard Oil case that was decided in 1911. We might have read about we might remember the Microsoft case from 1999, or the IBM case from the late 70s, or the AT&T case from 1982. We've had these great, important cases, antitrust cases, many of them over the years. What we are seeing right now, today, in Washington, and in Brussels, and in many other capitals around the world, is the most important period of antitrust enforcement in human history, in modern history. And it is focused and is being led to a large degree by Lena Khan and Jonathan Cantor and by President Biden's team. But it's focused. It's focused broadly, but it's focused especially on big tech. And it's like saying, we have to get this whole space right, the structure of power online. We have to get it right, because if we don't get it right, then we won't have democracy and we won't have individual liberty. We won't be able to share the information that we need to share with our friends and family, and with our business partners, with other members of our community, to make our lives safe, to make them rich, to make our communities safe and rich. So they are. This is an exciting moment, and people should be, as bad as the situation is, people should also be very focused and supportive of what is being done in their name in Washington and around the world today, because it is the most exciting period and most important period of anti-monopoly enforcement we have ever seen.
Now, Lena Khan is under attack, though, isn't she? And not just from these companies, but also even from some Democratic lawmakers.
She's been especially with the most famous sort of attack, and it came after. I mean, she's been under attack from by these companies, like through the Wall Street Journal. Like the Wall Street Journal's been attacking her almost every day, because it's like they represent the people who are making money off monopolies, and she's out there fighting on behalf of the citizens against monopoly control. She's fighting for lower prices. She's fighting for higher quality. She's fighting for fair service. She's fighting for democracy. And these people don't want her to win. They want to continue to manipulate you and rip you off. That's what they want to do. But there have been a couple of people who, from the Democratic side, since President Biden announced he was not running for re-election, there have been a couple of people who have announced that they would they've encouraged Vice President Harris, now that she's candidate, to promise to fire Lena Khan. One of these is Reid Hoffman, who's a Silicon Valley billionaire. But I think we should understand it's normal. This is the way business works. Of course, if there is an enforcer, a law enforcer in Washington, who is going to take the monopolists and take away some of their power, prevent them from ripping off the public as much as they've been ripping them off in the past. So they're not going to be able to make as much money. They're not going to be as unfairly powerful vis-a-vis everyone else. Those monopolists are going to complain. They're going to say, oh, no, you just got to let things continue the way they are, because that's what's good for society. What they really mean is that's what's good for me. And so would a President Harris listen to a Reid Hoffman? I see zero reason to believe that she would. She's Vice President Harris is a former public prosecutor. The U.S. courts recently said Google is an illegal monopoly. What Reid Hoffman basically just did is he offered a sitting vice president of the United States a gigantic bribe not to enforce the law. If you boil down what we watch in our newspapers, Reid Hoffman offered a gigantic bribe to the sitting vice president of the United States to not enforce the law, because doing so would be bad for him and his friends.
I think something else that's important to talk about, and we've been talking about how we are all using these platforms that are owned by monopolists, but it's just not us. Governments are dependent on these platforms as well. States themselves are dependent on these platforms for their ability to operate.
Absolutely. It's like all of the data. I mean, the Department of Defense, they rely on the cloud computing capacities that are provided by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. They depend on those. All their communications are across these same platforms. X, what used to be Twitter. Twitter is most governments still, that's the main platform they use to get their information out. Even today, even with this crazy fascist dude, Elon, running Twitter, running X, the governments are still sort of locked in to X as one of their primary ways they get their information out. But that's, all of this stuff, it takes, if you built something up over the course of 25, 30 years, it takes a while to change it. But the key takeaway for people is that the Biden administration has revolutionized how we do antitrust. They've taken us back to pre-Reagan. They're focused on saving democracy, on protecting your liberty as an individual, on protecting journalists and protecting free speech, and they have done more in 3 years than has ever been done. And so as we look ahead, I will tell you, 4 more years of Democratic control in Washington will allow us to finish this job, and we will make make the internet safe for democracy for the next 100 years. If Trump walks in and next January walks into the White House, it's going to be a lot more difficult to save democracy.
Has Donald Trump talked about these issues?
Yes, he's talked about these issues. His vice presidential candidate, Mr. Vance, Senator Vance, has spoken about these a lot. He's actually very focused on these. The difference is that there's two ways to deal with concentrated monopoly power. One way is you break it up or neutralize it. That's the Democratic way, a small d, Democratic. That's the American way. You break it up and you neutralize it. The other way, and we saw a little bit of this with Nixon back in the early 70s, and then we saw some of this with Trump in his first time in power, and he's pretty much promised this for his second time in power, is you could imagine a government that tries to take control over these platforms, these all-powerful platforms, and make them work for the government, make them work for, in this case, the president, make them work for Donald Trump. So what we should imagine, what we should expect if Donald Trump is the president, is that he will seek to make, he already has Elon Musk as his little gopher running around there doing whatever he can to get Trump elected.
Even giving people money.
You should expect it, yeah.
I mean, even giving people straight.
Yeah.
Does he have like some kind of like contest? If
He's giving away money, just which is illegal. What he's doing is illegal, but it's but we should also expect that Donald Trump, if I was Mark Zuckerberg, I look at Donald Trump. If Donald Trump wins, he's going to be in my face. He's going to be seeking to make me, Mark Zuckerberg, work for Donald Trump. And I don't think Mark Zuckerberg actually has really figured out how he will respond when Donald Trump is in his face saying, "You work for me now, boy." I do not think that the folks at Google have really figured out what they're going to say when Donald Trump is in their face saying to them, "You now work for me." So so that's why we really have when we see Trump versus Harris and we think of this moment of, well, one person promotes democracy, the other person promotes something that looks like fascism. When you layer into this choice that we face, the power of the tech platforms and the ways in which a Harris administration would interact with the platforms versus the way a Trump administration would interact with the platforms, what we really may be looking at right now is a difference between a truly democratic future that we can establish for the next 100 years and something that is absolutely unprecedented and absolutely terrifying, a concentration of power between government and private systems of communication and control that will make this country look really quite swiftly a lot like what we see in China.
My last question, this, what you call the antitrust revolution, it sounds like it's not predicated on bills necessarily passing. We know how difficult it is to get bills passed through law, but laws that already exist, the way you apply these laws. And if that's true, is there a concern, though, about whatever the Biden or even what the Biden administration has been able to achieve so far could all be done by the undone by the Supreme Court?
Yes. I mean, it's the easiest way to really lock in change is if Congress goes in and locks in change in a good way. But as you mentioned, we shouldn't expect that. Senator Klobuchar tried to get a couple of bills through, and she didn't succeed for reasons that are too long to go in right now. But what we have seen is that the administration has gone in and said, "Hey, these laws are still on the books. We don't actually need new laws. We have every single law we ever passed. We just need to look at them through a new lens." Or actually, just put on the old lens. Take off the neoliberal lens. Take off the lenses that were built by Bork and Posner in the 70s and 80s, and look at them through the lens of a Brandeis. Let's look at them through the lens of a FDR. Let's look at them through the lens that Truman looked at these laws, and we will see that all these laws are still in force, and we can use them today. And then the only people that can block you from using them is the Supreme Court. What's weird is that the Supreme Court is all over the place on this issue. They're confused. The conservatives and the liberals are both confused, and they are both doing things that are good, and they're both doing things that are bad. And that actually is the opportunity. It's this opportunity to educate people, to get people to look at this as human beings, and to just by reading their history, getting back into their history and thinking about how their historical processes, how these laws that were passed 100, 200 years ago can be used today to make our world safe for our democracy and to make our world safe for us, for our personal liberties, our most important liberties. We can achieve this. We are achieving this. We are winning right now. But we ain't won yet, so.
Barry Lynn is the executive director of the Open Market Institute, and he is the author of the new cover piece for Harper's magazine. It's called The Antitrust Revolution, Liberal Democracy's Last Stand Against Big Tech. Barry Lynn, I've enjoyed our conversation very much, and I thank you.
Hey, thank you for having me.